Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It's 9:40 p.m., Sunday, the 28th of December. Well, what's new? Um, I'm getting quotes on the windows and the doors, inside and outside doors for the house now, and for the drop ceiling. And then there's just a bit of kitchen work, and I'm pretty much done. And it's kind of cool. I guess it's been about a 5 month project. Hard to say, really. Somewhere about that. I think I started in July. So I built a house, 4 bedroom house in the Talamanca Mountains. So tonight I'm going to tell you some of the benefits of marrying into a Costa Rican family and living like a Costa Rican, which is considerably different than simply moving to Costa Rica. Now, I realize many of you may be coupled in a common law marriage or a marriage, something, and you can't pick up and go to another part of the world and find a mate. It's, I must say, I think significantly easier for a man. I think cross-cultural relationships are a bit more difficult for women. Free to contradict me in the comments. I just some guy doing a doing a podcast on a Sunday night in the rainforest. It's not like I have stacks of sociological research to back me up here. It's just my hunch. And I suppose it's valid in the sense that what you see with your eyes, right? But it's a very interesting observation, you know. You don't often see women go to other places and get married. I mean, it happens, but it's not the norm. And I think one of the reasons for that is women like to dominate the house. And I don't say that in a derisive way. I don't say that in a derogatory way. This place would be a shithole if my wife did not run it. Yeah, my my housekeeping skills are on par with a delinquent frat boy. If I were left to my own devices, there would be dirty underwear 3 months old under the bed that never gets recovered. If I were left to my own, the dogs would sleep in the bed with me. I think women are meant to run the house. I think that's simple biology, biological consciousness. And again, these things are not to be transcended, they're to be integrated. As I survey my words, and yes, I do watch my podcasts, because very often when I do them, I don't really know what I'm saying. It's sort of in the moment. And then I usually wait a day, and then I watch the podcast the next day, and I say, that was interesting. Where did you come up with that? To myself. And nobody answers. So women like to run the home, and if they're in a foreign culture, it compromises their ability to do that. There are exceptions. I realize I'm speaking in generalities. I don't want to offend the spirit of Amelia Earhart or anything of that nature. But generally speaking, these things are true. I love being married. I was married one other time to my son's mother, and it was torture for me. Not sure why. She turned out to be a wonderful mother, independent, made her own money. But I did not like being married at all in Canada. And then there was one other time I lived with a woman for a couple of years, and I did not like that either. But for some reason, here, I do. And it's worth thinking about. What's the difference? Well, this is the most traditional relationship I have ever been in. Not completely. There's many exceptions to the rule of tradition. One of those exceptions is I do not protect the house or the family. My wife does, by her reputation. And her reputation is somebody who can get things done. So, if greatly offended, she will get done the rebalancing of that offense. Old Testament. Now, the only time I feel like a man up here is when there's a snake on the property. Snakes are a primal fear for my wife. A primal fear transcends a phobia in the depth of its penetration into the psyche of the individual. So snakes are a primal fear for my wife. So when I hear a scream, I say, "What's going on?" She says, "Culebra." And I say, "Okay." Usually what I do is I grab my walking stick, which is pretty thick. It's about that thick. It's a bit heavy to walk with, but it's really good support in the jungle. And it's about 5 feet tall. And it's made of a hardwood called manu, which is nature's concrete. And I go to where my wife is, and she points out the snake. And I go in with the stick, and boom, like that. And with the end of the stick, you've got to get the snake right on the head. And you can usually, if you get good at it, and I've gotten quite good at it, you can usually kill the snake in one strike, sometimes twice. There's no error for margin, though. There's no margin. There's no error for margin, though. There's no margin for error. How could it be a Freudian slip if I did it twice in a row? So I feel like a man. Now, the opposite is true for the spiders. I've had Bob up here, Navy SEAL, and we've had situations where we call my wife, and she just comes in. She doesn't care what it is. Brazilian wandering spider, acidic urine tarantula. She doesn't care. Spiders do not bother her. Off comes the chancleta. Boom. Falls to the ground. Little giggle as she mocks us, and then she leaves the room, and we're left to sweep it up. But the tradition comes in the displacement of responsibilities. I am responsible for everything financial in the house and every major financial emergency in the family, which fortunately for me thus far is not that many. Now, I used to fight this. It used to piss me off to no end. I do not fight this anymore. I step up. It took forever for me to get them out of the mindset of self. Bruce, 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 Bruce. Bruce's money is Bruce's money. You have a roof over your head and the fridge is full. What more do you want from me? Why don't you get a job? I thought that way about 6, 7 years ago at the beginning of the relationship. And then I saw over time that the management of this large family, those who live on the mountain and those who no longer live on the mountain, so the family is spread out through this area of the province of Limon, spread out for about, I don't know, 30 kilometers or so. Not far, but a lot of those 30 kilometers are really slow driving, like the mountain road and stuff. And I just sat back for the longest time and I watched my wife operate. And there are things for her to do every day that are impossible to avoid for the benefit of the family, for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of the church. Big celebration last night. They were there till 5 in the morning. Holy cow. Quite beautiful for a while. I went over and sang hymns with them, clapped my hands, bounced around. My wife asked me this morning, she said, I think the Holy Spirit entered into you. And I went, no, that wasn't the Holy Spirit. That was just a good rhythm and a good time. She says, oh, for me, I feel God enter into me. I said, yeah, I understand that. For many people, that's true. It's just a moment of joy in being, right? Celebration of being alive. Singing gospel hymns in Spanish. It's very beautiful. Very beautiful. But for me, it's the quiet samadhi of meditation, where consciousness leaves the body but doesn't emulate sleep or loss of consciousness. And you go through the light and you go into these magical vortexes of sound, kaleidoscope of images that you can hardly make sense of most of the time. Sometimes you can. An incredible sense of being and peace. But it's that light and sound that is the Holy Spirit for me. I don't rub it in. A younger me would have, but no more. I just let people be. So my wife takes care of the home. I don't have to worry about anything here. I wake up, there's clean clothes. Bed sheets are changed every second, third day. I wear a pair of jeans once. They're cleaned and folded and dry and back in the armoire. And my responsibility is to make sure my wife has the means to be her. Financial means to be her, and her is generous. And so I just stopped fighting it some time ago. The only lingering peeve I have is Stephen. But that's justified, and even my wife's on my side this time. I paid a few $1,000s for this wood balcony work. He didn't do the wood right. He didn't get it sealed properly, and it's all rotting. It's got to be redone. And my wife's going, yeah, he really screwed that up. He's got to redo it. And I'm like, well, I'm glad we agree. I don't want my son running a tourism business and have 3 tourists break their ankles because the balcony collapses. So he's done a good job on the house, though. So, as you might imagine, the question becomes, did I change? Did I just get wiser as I got older? Am I just more balanced? Did I have to wait till I was 51 to have a successful marriage? Was it me? Or were the conditions for marriage debased in Canada? I'm not saying I've come to a conclusion. I'm only saying it's a worthy topic of conversation and thought. I I do not believe that marriage works in the first world anymore. Many of you who listen to me are happily married. You are the exceptions. Once again, I'm speaking generally. It's not absolute. But the marriages that I have seen work in my home country among my friends are very traditional in their own way. And I think the problem lies in how we define the importance of family, where it fits into the world that you're living in from the inside out. So if you come from a family culture where family was everything, and in my experience in Canada, I saw this very distinctly in 2 cultures: Portuguese and Italian. And the children were just really well balanced. And there was a sense when I would meet their mothers and fathers as I was growing up that family was everything. You walk into their home and you know you're dealing with another order of family. That the people in that family put the family first. And that if the man is working 60 or 70 hours a week, all of that money is going to the wife and it's going to the family. And so the wife, knowing that the father, the husband, is out there working his fingers to the bone for the family, develops true respect for him, spiritual respect. And when the man is out working and he knows the home is solid, sound, the children are solid and sound, it allows an energy and a motivation for him to do what he does and to do it better. No, I want you to know I'm just speaking from my heart. Truly, I am. And I could give many examples of things that I have seen which are informing what I'm saying tonight. First and foremost is my own family. And my family was a catastrophe, emotional catastrophe that nobody survived. I think they did. There's a facade, like a one dimensional Western street for a movie set, but you go through the saloon doors and there's no three dimensions, there's no depth to the saloon. It's just a wood facade the set carpenters built. There was a wonderful facade in my family. I know that when I wrote The Devil in Us and heard back from some of my readers, female, there was offense. There was offense because of some things I said in the first few chapters. Things like my mother wanted to marry Tyler Moore her life. You're gonna make it after all. We know now. We can no longer delude ourselves that there has been a third force working on Western society. Now, a full culpability, a full blame cannot be allocated to the third force because nothing was mandated. It was not mandated like a communist system. It was offered. It is, or it was, or both it is and was, the apple in the Garden of Eden. And nobody pinned Eve down or Adam down and forced that apple into their mouths and forced them to masticate and swallow the apple. There was consent. Now, because I believe in a single rule of the world, I'm not sure what it is. I don't like to name it. To me, it just sounds foolish. You know, Weishaupt founded the Illuminati in 1776, and it's the Freemasons. I don't think so. I don't know what it is really. Some people listening to me right now of religious persuasion would say, "It's Satan, you idiot. What do you think Satan is?" And I see that. I see the analogy. I see the comparison. Yes. But for some reason, perhaps obstinance or mental pride, despite the fact that I pride myself on reducing the amount I think, I shall not accept that it's Satan. There's just too much organization in it. Satan is more one-on-one. Okay? Satan is more one-on-one. Satan often comes in dreams. There's a tremendous similarity between an alien and abduction and a visitation by Satan. They both are remembered as dreams, but when you wake up the next day, there are physical artifacts in your bedroom correlating the dream to the dream, which were not there when you went to sleep. So in the example of an alien abduction, There would be marks on your body in a symmetrical way that would be improbable or impossible if you scratched yourself or your cat scratched you and you didn't wake up or something like that. And in the case of the satanic visitation, the demonic visitation, there's generally artifacts in the room that have changed position, which correlate to how the room looked in the dream, or something like that. Just enough so you know I'm not going crazy, that dream really happened. So let's, for the sake of podcasting argument and podcasting flow, let's assume that I'm right, that there is a single force of operation upon the human race, and that it manifests itself in societal progressions which spread around the world, the way American culture has spread around the world like a virus through its music, its television, and its movies. The most broadcasted culture in the history of cultures, hands down. Now, if we were to, or if we are to look at societies through the lens of bondage, and if we were to connect the collective and the individual into a single paradigm of bondage. So let's deal with individual bondage first. You can come into bondage through bad decisions, addictions, the inability to overcome temptation. One might say that with everything that we've seen in the last several years coming out of events like Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, that Washington was in bondage. Now, the concept of bondage is fascinating when you study it. The mafia and various underworld organizations, they favor bondage as a modality of business. So they'll lend money to a high risk lender, probably knowing the lender can't pay back, but already having in mind a plan for the lender when they default, in which they make 5 times the loan's value in a year or less or a little bit more. And it's done through a complete vacating of the rights of the individual. See this in China a lot. When I was over there, I read about it a lot. Not in the news, but in their literature. And sometimes I heard about it happening from Chinese friends. So somebody would incur a gambling debt, and they couldn't pay it back. They would be given several warnings, several extensions, and then the heavy hand would come in. Your 18-year-old daughter is very beautiful. Did I ever mention I own a brothel as well as an illegal underground casino? I will take your daughter for 1 year, and she will work in my brothel. And at the end of that 1 year, I will return your daughter to you, and your debt to me is forgiven. Bondage. The Deal with the Devil, Robert Johnson at the Crossroads, the blues guitarist. I do believe that these spiritual deals are made for spiritual equity. The spiritual equity is usually the astral body. The astral body is cannibalized by these spiritual entities that can grant favor in this physical timeline. And I don't believe that's a metaphor. I think that's quite literal. People make deals with, we'll call it the devil, but dark entities. And their lives are changed. But near the end of it, when the excitement of what they gained is gone, and the value of what they've gained is gone, they see the error, they realize the error. There's nothing they can do at that point. And the same thing is with the example of the daughter. What would be taken from her in that year could hardly ever be replaced in a human life. The energy, the dignity, the sovereignty of self. Would somebody like that be able to go on and have a normal life, get married and be a good mother? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. So that's individual bondage. And when we look at individual bondage, if the bondage is incurred by a person, if a person enters into bondage of their own free will because of decisions they made, then I see that and I go, yeah, hard to watch, but one cannot disagree with the outcome, however distasteful it is. However distasteful it is that the other party could not forgive the debt to the point that they would do what they do to regain the debt or the value of the debt. It's collateralizing human life. It's just another form of slavery. And I suppose the root moral issue here is, should human life be collateralized? Ideally, no. But who are we to speak for the unbearably poor? Who are we to speak to that? Where somebody under guardianship forfeits their sovereignty and is forced into bondage for the error of the guardian, the father or the mother, that's much more distasteful. Boy, buddy. Cat just popped in through the window. You come in to say hello there, are you? It's very distasteful, but it happens. And in those situations, I look at it and I go, well, that's really kind of in the family. Horrible to see, but I can't really comment or judge. It's not my place. So those are examples of what I would call individual bondage, spiritual bondage with an entity. All forms of magic are forms of spiritual bondage. All forms of magic, even if they're masquerading as religions. Now, the collective is a whole other ballgame. Now, whether you realize this or not, the physical world, as it's governed from the astral or overseen from the astral, from the invisible world, is divided up amongst powers and principalities. And if it sounds like I'm quoting the Bible, it's because I am. And for the most part, in my opinion, the Bible gets the astral physical relationship correct. And so societies are governed by powers and principalities. And if it's a benign collective, see you, buddy. If it's a benign collective, their principality or principalities will be benign. And when I say benign, I mean, or I could mean, angelic, a protective principality. So when you're physically in the geography of that principality, you feel benighted. I think I should look that up. I want to make sure I got that right. Benighted definition. Nope. I got it exactly wrong, actually. Benighted is in a state of pitiful or contemptible intellectual or moral ignorance, typically owing to a lack of opportunity. It's actually the literal and diametric opposite of what I meant. So, what's the word I'm looking for? Blessed. We'll go with blessed. It's a simple word, right? Simple enough word. So, when you're in a region that has positive principalities, there's a feeling of blessedness there. You can even get it in some churches, a lot of churches actually, mosques as well, churches, mosques, Buddhist temples, Taoist temples that I visited in Taiwan. The moment you crest the door, you feel it. My son and I, we went to visit a number of temples and houses of worship in India, in the province of Punjab, which is largely Sikh. Some Hindi, but largely Sikh. And the moment you pass the threshold, you feel it. So you feel it when you travel as well. Now, this is a very interesting thing to observe and a very interesting thing for me to say aloud. There are no powers or principalities in airports. How do I know this? Well, I don't. I just feel it. So, no matter where you fly to in the world, when you get off your plane and you walk through that fabricated tunnel and you enter into the physical building of the airport, all airports have a similar feeling. They're sort of neutral. There's a very neutral feeling there, almost like purgatory. But the moment you pass through customs and the sliding doors open, you walk out to the front of an airport and usually wherever you go, and I've been to dozens of airports all over the world, they're all the same. You'll see people milling about. You'll see signs held up with people's names on them. You'll see a taxi stand. You'll see the guy that's running the taxi stand. You'll see a bunch of taxis parked and lined up. But irregardless of the fact that it's all the same scene outside of an airport, you can immediately feel the principalities of the country you're in. Immediately. So, enough with my proof. Enough of my opening statement about the legitimacy of powers and principalities. It is true. And so we come to the idea of collective bondage. This is a fascinating idea, and I'll be honest with you, I have been contemplating this most of my life. And I'll tell you why. It speaks to this ongoing schism, space, between the East and the West and the spiritual traditions therein, representing the hemispheres of the brain in my analogy. So if you're a good, righteous, clean living person, you do not succumb to sin. You do not put your family in jeopardy. You make all of the right decisions. You pray every day, meditate, contemplate. You help the poor to your capability. You're a good neighbor. You're all of those things. But if the collective you live in succumbs to poor decisions, succumbs to temptations, and ends up in debt, and here the debt would be to other nation states, or in some instances, to powers and principalities arguing for jurisdiction above you. It's always struck me as unfair that the good people in a bad society are punished. And I've never found anything in all of the teachings I've studied, in all of the spiritual literature that I've read, I have never come across anything that explains the karma of that. If karma is applied to an individual, why would the Creator allow a bad circumstance or the bondage of an unfulfilled debt to shackle a good person? Well, I don't know. I suppose we could look at the story of Joseph, the father of the Christ. We could look at his dream where an angel told him to get the family out of Bethlehem or Nazareth or wherever they were because Herod was going to kill the newborn baby boys based on what his soothsayers had told him. And that would be an example of a good and righteous man circumventing the bondage of a collective. And it happens. But you could also make the case that the failure in perception or spiritual guidance or spiritual inspiration, the failure on the part of the individual to not see the collective temptation and the bad decisions of governance is consent to the consequence of the contract. Now, you can see this spiritual struggle in the collective of America very clearly. You can't see it so clearly in Australia or Canada. And I don't know why that is. I suppose you could say you see it in the struggle of Britain as well, the rising up of the Brits. Some of the northern European countries are starting to get their shit together too. The Dutch are saying no more burqas or something like that. They're getting much more militant. Um, the female prime minister of Italy, Meloni, she's also becoming more demonstrative. But when I look at my home country of Canada, and I remember growing up there, and I remember the general goodness of the people, it strikes me as somewhat unfair the fate that is falling upon Canada now, which is dire. And I mean that literally. I'm not being hyperbolic or politically dramatic for the sake of podcasting. It is dire now in Canada. It's dire. And yet still, the majority of the population that is vocal and public about their opinions, this would be the media and media pundits and people in power circles and people in industry, are still for the most part towing the line. And so what would be the sin there? What would be the transgression? Like in the example of the Chinese father with gambling debts losing his daughter to a brothel for a year, the story is very clear. But when we transpose the concept of bondage to a collective like Canada, and you examine it through the lens of consent and consequence, it becomes less clear. The only thing that comes to mind is a Catholic notion from my childhood, which would be the sins of omission. So sins of commission are things you do. I stole that money. I did it. You caught me. I accept my punishment. Sin of commission, punitive legal measure for atonement or rebalancing with your society. Go to jail, community service, whatever your sentence is going to be. Sin of omission is the season finale or the final season of Seinfeld, which I know of but did not watch. And that is where they fail to help somebody and they're passing through a town that has a good Samaritan law. And in failing to help that person, they're charged. And they end up going to jail. So it's a sin of omission. Now, sins of omission, or the karma of omission, we'll call it, is a consequence of comfort. Sins of omission are the consequence of comfort and the habit of comfortable people. It's also the habit of people who've come to rely too much on government. Why don't you help that person? Oh, there's government programs to help him. I don't have to help him. You know, all that kind of bullshit goes away in a small mountain pueblo. If somebody's hurting up here, then you have to help. I've seen my wife do things that are unconscionably compassionate to the point where after the person's gone, I say, "Why would you help that piece of shit?" She just looks at me and she goes, "Well, they have nobody else and they need to be helped." And I go, "Huh? Wrong again, Bruce. And you're the one who went to university." And then there's the final bondage. And this one is perhaps the most transparent of them all, even though it's collective. And that's global bondage. And that, in my estimation, seems to be coming at the hand of the most merciless debt collectors on the planet, the Sanhedrin and the minions of the Sanhedrin. But it doesn't seem to me at the same time to be a fair contract because the terms have been manipulated through the machinations of institutions controlled by people in favor of the global bondage. And this would be the prime ministers and presidents of countries, the central bankers, the principal exchanges like Wall Street, Bay Street, Fleet Street. They've all been complicit, and they're the easiest to make complicit. So, an example of this would be the displacement of $1 trillion created out of thin air in a fabricated economic term called easing to salvage the chaos of Wall Street greed through the issuance of allegedly AAA bonds that were really substandard and defective low-grade bonds that never should have made their way into the reserves of central banks around the world. And here I'm talking about the mortgage bonds that were issued around the world from the US financial system. None of them went to jail, so the consequence to contract for the individuals who did it were negligible. Nobody went to jail, as I said before, except for Bernie Madoff. But Bernie Madoff was tangential. He wasn't part of this principal scam. He was running his own scam and got exposed in the liquidity freeze. Sorry for all the financial terms. There's no other way to speak about that without using financial terms. But this single force that I believe controls the world or directs its fate in some way, it wants this bondage. It wants this bondage. And if we have corrupt leaders, we have no hope of salvation. And the vacating of corruption in government positions is an equally perilous journey. There were numerous leaders, African and I believe a former Japanese prime minister, who spoke out about the vaccine and they all mysteriously died. So it's go along or get gone. So it would take tremendous courage for the individuals in power in the various nation states under their powers and principalities to make these decisions. It would take a real hero, to be honest, a true hero. Now, another interesting question as we go into global bondage is what happens to the regional powers and principalities? It's almost like the satanic hierarchy is folding into the throne of Lucifer, metaphorically speaking. Well, that's enough pontificating for tonight. Self responsibility is the antidote to all bondage contracts. And the day is nigh that you will wish that you heeded these warnings. But it's probably an incontrovertible conclusion, if you haven't acted yet, that you're going to end up in bondage. And there will be pain to that. I'm going to name tonight's podcast after one of my favorite Somerset Maugham novels of human bondage. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.